Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
We are really pleased to have a special guest with us today, and it's the crossover that you've all been waiting for, because we have Gavin Smith from the Church Office podcast. So welcome, Gavin.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you guys.
Absolutely. No, really glad to have you with us. Another great church-related podcast, another great UK church-related podcast. So thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here. It's great, yeah. And I love the angle of this camera. It makes my head look huge. My kids always say to me on the podcast when I'm going, Dad, you've got such a big head, and your angle makes it even bigger. So apologies if you're watching. Okay, got a giant head.
Well, that's quite a sort of opening remarks.
Yeah.
So on to some equally important questions to get us started. You closed asking me about this.
I did.
What is your favourite biscuit?
My favourite biscuit. Okay, I've thought long and hard about this, and we did talk about the chocolate hobnobs, but I am such a fan of Christmas. I'm going with the shortbread, Scottish shortbread. Ooh. It's good on a dip, but yes. I can wake up Christmas morning and make my way through, maybe half of the tin by 10 o'clock.
Just plain vanilla, sort of sugar, no extra ginger, chocolate, fruit. Whatever.
I will go with a little bit of chocolate chip in a shortbread cookie. That is probably the top choice.
I think we'd struggle to find a biscuit which wouldn't be improved by just being coated in a really thick layer of chocolate. In my mind,
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Super. Well, that's I accept that as a worthy opponent to my chocolate hobnob. So yes, no, that is I'm there with you for that. What is your favourite social media platform?
Well, the one I find the easiest to use, I guess, I'll go with it on that, is Facebook. My wife says to me, "You're old and you're on Facebook," but I do find it easier. Yeah, I like to use that. I find Instagram a little bit mixed in terms of how easy it is to use. So I would say Facebook through and through.
Have you dabbled with Threads at all?
No, I haven't. I tell you what, I'm not the best on social media. So let me put that out there. I am apologizing. I've learnt a lot from listening to your podcast. So it's good. It's good. Yeah.
Well, if it works for you, I think that's the challenge slightly with social media, is that people think they have to go on to the next thing just because that's where everyone else is. But if you're somewhere where you're happy, then that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. I've got 4 kids, and they're all different kind of ages, from 19 down to 12, and they're all on all these different social media platforms. And I feature some of them where they record me doing stupid stuff, and I've been caught out a few times with the celebration ones, and you're the last person to go on that, and nobody claps or whatever. Yeah, So I featured a few times on those things.
Yeah. So star of TikTok, but not got an account.
Do you have any favourite podcasts? Are there any regulars that you frequently listen into?
Yeah, no, I regularly listen to you guys. One of my favourite podcasts, it is from America, is a Lead Culture podcast by Jenny Catron. And brilliant lady, talks a lot about sort of culture. And for me, it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I love to think about. So she talks a lot about building culture in churches. What is their experience behind the scenes? What are people's experience of being in church? And she just, there's some really helpful stuff, from moving from rota culture to team culture. What is that like? So you don't just join a rota, you join a team, and being part of that team is different. As a team leader, you get cared for, you work on this together. You're always on duty, rather than, this is my week and I'm not on duty the next week. I love some of her thinking. It is American, so you do have to kind of sieve through some of the cultural differences. But really inspiring lady, worth thinking about, worth checking out.
Yeah, I'll definitely listen to that one. As a church which is currently going through that, I want to say transition, let's say experiment of team culture, that sounds really great.
Yeah, for sure. And not most important, the last question is equally as important to the others. Gourd or pomegranate?
Well, I wouldn't I wouldn't. Yeah, when I first thought about it, I was thinking, what would I choose? And we have pomegranates a lot in the house, so I'm going to have to go pomegranates. Not that I eat them, and nor do I know what a gourd is particularly either. Someone told me it was a vegetable, so
We like to make the guests do the research before coming.
Yeah, Catherine, my PA, she was like, you should really, take a look at these questions and think about them. I was like, okay, I will. So pomegranates all the way.
Pomegranates going with the crowd. So, Gavin, thank you again for being with us. So, just introduce yourself as we get started. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you've got to this point. What has your career looked like? What has your life looked like?
Yeah, it's good. Well, I have worked as a church manager for Christ Church in Newport. It's a church that I grew up in as a kid, and so it's a real privilege to be the church kind of administrator to start with, and then the role's kind of grown. I've been on staff for 21 years, so I'm like very old in our team in that sense, and it's been a joy, and I've loved being part of the team here. I felt a sense of call to ministry, but I never had any gifts of getting out the front and preaching, or that kind of pastoral care. And I was thinking, well, I don't really know how this fits. But we had a really good senior pastor called Pete Greasy, and he really valued the gift of administration, and I think he spotted it in me before I even became aware of it, and so it's a real joy. So I've loved kind of being part of that. I came straight out of school into sport and football, and that was kind of my background for 3 or 4 years, and coaching and things like that. And then I had a phone call from our senior pastor saying, we'd like you to come and work on our team. We've got no idea what you're going to do. And he said, give us a year to kind of figure it out. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is something that I should be involved in. And 21 years later, I'm still here. I still have no idea what I'm doing either. So, yeah.
I mean, you alluded to it slightly there. So your job title at the moment is church manager, right?
Church manager, yeah.
And I mean, what's in a name? How is that different from church administrator or any other, like what churches might call it?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, so when I was a church administrator, I was kind of running the office and the kind of functioning of the office and all the day-to-day tasks that were going on. And then as the role grew, I'm kind of, as a manager now, I'm kind of responsible for the building, the finances, the staff, the program, the different projects that we have in terms of Mercy Ministries or Children's Ministry. Those are kind of all my overview, but we've got teams of people. We've got about a staff team, about 15 people working for us. So a lot of it is just kind of coordinating and working. My kids say, Dad, you go to work and you tell people what to do all day. And that's their understanding of it. And I was like, well, okay, is that a compliment or is that like a criticism? I'm trying to work that out. And I think that's probably, I try and see my role as kind of an enabling role of others. How do I help people connect to our church? How do I help people find the different gifts that they've got and use those gifts to serve the church and God's glory, and also taking the gospel out there? What does that look like? How can we inspire and encourage people, support people in the different roles that they can play in that? So, yeah, I love it. The best job I've ever had, by far.
That's amazing. And I love that enabling thing. And it's like, for something which is purely seen, I mean, if it's in the name as administrator, often it's seen as just a purely logistical administrative role, but it's clearly so much more than that. But I suppose we'll get onto that in a second. So tell us about the Church Office podcast itself. So how long's that been around? What do you cover?
Yeah, it's. I said to you on my podcast that I'm sort of totally winging it. So one of the things, really good piece of leadership from our senior pastor during COVID. He was like, right, you guys the building's shutting down. There's going to be less to do on finance. The staff are furloughed. Right, this is a time to use. How can you use this time effectively? And we sort of went back and forth, and I spent a bit of time praying and thinking, do you know what? Actually, I wonder if there's people who are in churches, and leaders particularly who are in churches, who don't have somebody in my role. And there was a real sense of, how could I support leaders who were carrying an administrative burden, be released in some way, or make their life easier or something, what could we do that would be a blessing to them and serve other churches? And there was this like real kind of kingdom mindset of, right, forget our church for a minute. What could you do to serve other churches? And I was kind of inspired by that and thought, well, okay, why don't we, put a website together? And I realized that there was kind of nothing behind the scenes to encourage people in those kind of administrative operations roles. So I thought, right, okay, well, let's get a website going. Maybe all the documents and templates and stuff that we've used for 20 years, maybe that would serve somebody to have access to those for free of charge. Maybe that would be, so if a leader gets told, right, you need a loan policy, you're at the church building by yourself, the trustees haven't got time, you're the only pastor, like, where do you start? And I was like, well, okay, let's put something online that maybe someone can go to. And then someone said to me, well, every context is different, so we need a podcast, or you need something that you can talk about the context and then help people start to think, right, what do I need to bring in? What can I do better? Where are the gaps that we need to do? So the podcast just kind of flowed out from that idea. And I've never done a podcast before. I had no clue what I was doing. I was trying to edit this thing and trying to run it all and do it. But God's blessed it, and people are listening to it, and I hope finding it useful. And I'm certainly not. I wouldn't see it as massively successful, but I know actually there are people behind it who are listening to it, going, this was really helpful. This really encouraged me. I'm like, well, okay, that's kingdom building, and God's glorified in that. So I'm in. I'll carry it on until somebody shoots me. Yeah,
it's that kind of balance, isn't it? Of like, we're not doing this to get thousands and thousands of listeners. Equally, we would love to help thousands of people because we believe in the help that we're giving. But ultimately, if it helps a couple and really helps them, that's amazing. It's all for the kingdom, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's great. And people listen to podcasts a lot, don't they? Like, I listen to podcasts when I'm going around Tesco's, shopping, or in the car driving somewhere. You get 20 minutes and you're like, I'll stick something on and listen to it. So it's become kind of like part of my life, and then you meet people like yourselves who are doing a brilliant job in an area, and you're like, right, we've got to tell other people about this. We've got to get these guys on the podcast. And I literally, that is my only strategy. You meet someone, you're like, wow, this person is amazing. They do this far better than I can do it. Right, let's get them on the podcast to share what they do. So,
what has been your favourite episode that you've done?
My favourite episode, I've enjoyed them all. I mean, there's one particularly that I think I've enjoyed the most, and that's a lady who was running Acts 435, and I don't know if you guys have come across that. And just a lovely lady doing a lovely work, just supporting churches in the background to get funding to do mercy ministries. And you can link up to this charity, and it's kind of a crowdfunding website, and you can go on and post needs in your church, needs in the community. And I think for me, I've had so much feedback from people going, wow, I've connected with this lady, this organization, and Mercy Ministries has grown in our church because of that, listening to that podcast. And I'm like, wow, this is great. So it wasn't, so the one that's, I see the fruit from is probably the one that I go, oh yeah, I love that. And I think that's what I've enjoyed about the podcast. There's so many, is you meet people who are doing brilliant work across the UK. Like, I chatted to a guy called Matt Waldock who's talking about gospel coaching and his heart to serve pastors. And you're like, this guy knows what he's doing. Man, this stuff is brilliant. And you hear the fruit on the podcast of what, the difference that it makes to a leader who has just once a month regular gospel coaching. Ministry's thriving because of it. And I get excited about it.
And it's there's a lot of diverse topics there, aren't there?
Yeah.
I think one of your most recent ones is about how to pay pastors or ministers and salaries and that sort of thing. And these are all conversations which will happen and probably happen in every church again and again and again. Maybe occasionally they don't happen, and they should. Yeah. It's really encouraging to see them addressed and just unpacked and thought through, and can help churches to do that in their own thinking.
Yeah, it is. These are the questions that people face. So we do cover a broad range of topics, whether it's finance, because that's what I'm involved in, and there's real strength. You're doing the job. I'm doing the job full time. I'm winging the podcast. I'm doing my best to make the church office as good as I can. but there's a real credibility of like, gosh, yeah, we're sitting down thinking, right, how do we pay our pastors this year? What should we be doing? Right, yeah, let's take that topic, because I know other people will be asking those same questions, whether it be building, finance, whether it be policy, procedure, whether it be just how we're doing, as administrators, where, it's a lonely job. You're working in the background with little thanks and little recognition until something goes wrong. Oh man, I want to celebrate those people on the podcast and thank them for what they're doing. It's amazing.
Yeah. So you kind of have just touched on it there. But what would you say in your perspective is unique about the role of church workers, and it's like you saying sort of administrators or operations managers, like it's there's so many different names for it, but that title could be used in secular roles, but what do you think are the sort of the key differences with it being in a church context?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and let me share a story. I think I learned this kind of early on in my career. I was the first year in kind of church administrator, and I was managing a guy who'd come in and do building work Mondays and Fridays. It was those days coming in, and he used to put the chairs out on a Friday, and the guy used to take like 2 or 3 hours to put the chairs out. Like I was like, okay, 300 chairs. Like, how long does it take you? And so I pull him in, and it was probably the worst bit of leadership I've ever shown. And I say, right, why does it take you so long? Do this quicker, And he sat me down. He said, Gav, he said, the thing is, he says, what I love to do when I put the chairs out on the Sundays, I love to pray for the people that are in those seats on a Sunday morning. And you'll see me wandering up the hall and praying for, where our young people sit on the Sunday. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I'm on the floor at this point thinking, this guy has made the connection between the practical things that he's doing behind the scenes, and he's having a spiritual effect on our church by praying for people. And so that just grew within me, the idea that something practical, something operational can have a spiritual effect and have a gospel effect on our church is amazing. And I think, part of our training that we do at the church office says every single ministry, every team, every person, every role that you have in the church somehow connects to the gospel, but people don't make the connection very easily or quickly. So you're on a camera team on Sunday, you just go, oh yeah, I'm on the camera team because I've got a bit of gifting in this. But how does that link to the gospel? How does that link to having a spiritual blessing and just blessing our church? The 50 kids workers who are serving in different ways, who are missing the Sunday message, hear it because you are serving there on a Sunday morning. You don't even realize it, but you're a blessing to this church. And I think that's what's lovely about our church work, isn't it? Is that if we see these things, that the small part that we play, or I'm playing a part here, this connects to our gospel mission. It's transforming. Like, there's joy, there's life in it, and in a secular way, you just don't have that. So we get a real privilege to sit behind the scenes, and be involved in that and encourage people. And I just spend my time talking to people, saying, like, thanks for what you're doing. Like, you're on the welcome team. You welcome like Christ welcomes. Like, that is powerful, and thank you for doing that. And God is glorified, and people are blessed through it, and that gets me excited. And I think that's what I love about, what we do in the church. Make those connections. If you're not making those connections, find a way, sit down and just work it out. Like, we went through our staff team and said that every role connects to the gospel. Somebody do the links. What are the links? And I had a lady who cleaned the toilets in our 15 years in our building, and she knocks on my door and she goes, Gav, I found the connection. Super excited. I was like, okay, you can give up cleaning the toilets if you want. She said, no. She said, she's like, I've made this connection. She said, I clean the toilets as well as I can because there are places that I won't go to, a pub or a restaurant, because their toilets are so horrible. I don't want our church to be on someone's list. I'm like, whoa, okay. You've made that connection, and that's motivating you. Like, it's not about the money or the job description or the title, all those things that matter in the secular. But this, wow, yeah, makes that connection. I love that. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but that I'm
not
getting
at
too
all.
excited about it. But this is good stuff.
It's great, and there's the two steps, isn't it? Is the like having that attitude of trying to look for the ways of connecting it back and connecting it to the vision, but it does also take a little bit of sort of strategic thought of let's just take some time out to think about these things, and to instill that attitude and maybe do some of the work, but to mainly just to get that attitude there, because a lot of the time you need to state the vision so that people can know how they're fitting into it, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and if you make that connection yourself, then you know, motivation, people signing up, all those things, it happens naturally because people are just motivated by our mission, and that's how it should be, you know.
It's also interesting you saying about sort of making the connection, and obviously everywhere people need to clean toilets and stuff, and or move chairs.
Yeah.
And often it is seen as the not sexy jobs, or you know, the sort of, oh, I'm just going to do it and get it over with. But actually, even if you had a job secularly cleaning toilets, to be able to use that as an opportunity. I'm thinking sort of personally, like my family do a lot of holiday let cleanings. Actually, that could be a really cool thing for, I'm going to tell my mum to do this actually, when she's cleaning the holiday homes, is to actually pray for those people so that they have an amazing time here. And like, so actually you could take that sort of model and put that in a secular context, and I think that's a great way of people seeing like, well, how can I use my faith in the workplace? But also the reverse of, if you initially called out this guy about how long he was taking for chairs, for him to be able to share that and you go, oh, okay, that's cool, like that is so fine by me, because in any work situation they'd be like, no, you have to speed it up, or you know, I don't want to hear that sort of talk being said. So for people to feel comfortable and encouraged to be able to live out their faith in that way, that's actually a really nice thing to be able to do that within a church.
It's lovely, isn't it? And I think, you know, we talk about comms, and you guys are involved in comms. You know, we've been setting up a new coffee shop in the church, and so many people have come through the door saying, oh, I saw this on Instagram, and I saw it. And I'm like, how is this message getting back to the person who sat at the desk, doing the posts, creating the content? I was like, we got to find ways that they hear about the fruit and just go exciting. We had a lady who started coming to church on Sundays because, you know, you start pulling on the thread. Yeah, she saw it on Instagram. She invited a friend. They came to the coffee shop. They were like blown away by the service and the kindness of people. Came back on a Sunday morning and are now on a kind of pathway to go, right, I want to find out more about Christ. And you're like, this is gospel ministry, and you're right. And, you know, in the secular place, it's all about, you know, how do we live for the glory of God, isn't it? And so whether you're cleaning or whether you're doing something in the workplace, making that connection back into why I do what I do, and how some way I can reflect something of who God is in the excellence or in the way that I bring it, is really, really important. Yeah.
So we often talk, like there's this assumption that churches have an administrator or a secretary. I know that I can be guilty of that. Even if they do have that, there's an assumption that it's a paid role, and it obviously isn't always the case. But many churches only have one employee, and that's the minister. Obviously, some churches don't even have that. So at what point do you think churches should be thinking about hiring additional employees? You know, should that necessarily be an administrator as the first port of call, or should it be something else? You know, what do they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I think the scripture teaches us, doesn't it, about every member ministry. And so what are the gifts that we have in the church that can function in all the different ways that we've got? So if you've got a building, you're going to need some gifting in those areas. If you need some administration. And I think once you get to a certain point where you're maybe like 50 members over, you start to need to have some of these things. And you start to kind of feel at that point like things are just falling through the cracks, or like we're creaking a little bit, or like we've forgotten to do a couple of things, and you start feeling those things. And you go, actually, we need a little bit of focus, bit of coordination, and the church office has helped kind of churches of that size go, right, has anyone got the gift of administration? And we're not talking about a role yet or a paid role yet, but maybe there's a way that we can just get a team of volunteers together who can just start to serve and just think about these areas and organizing events. It may be organizing a program and just sharing information to people. And so we've seen that kind of need right early on at sort of 50. If you're doing a church plant, then man, there's so much to coordinate. Going without a building, and just the teams and the people that you need, and the organization of the venues and the challenges with venues and all those things. You start to go, right, we really want our leader not to have to think about these things. So
I'd never thought about it from that perspective, actually. But yeah, not just size, but actually be a brand new church. But you've got to do it all from scratch. So someone's got to do it. Yeah,
it's all there. And so the church office has been started to talk about, right, what would it be to create a kind of church planting pack that supports you in those early years. Amazing. So service agreements, and what do you need to think about when you approach a venue? What kind of insurance do you need? Just stuff like that goes, right, actually, what do I help people to think through the details. And I think at those points, then introducing some management tools like Church Suite, Expense Plus, some of these things will help you, that are almost like people time, but actually a bit of software or a bit of a tool of this kind will just help you to move things forward. So I think it's really down to your individual leader. If you're in that scenario, you're saying one leader who's going, right, things are creaking. What gifts do they have? What are the weaknesses that they have that we need to step in and cover? Can we do it voluntary? Or at we point, maybe when you get to 100, and you're thinking, actually, we need a dedicated person with dedicated time to this. And then you start thinking about that kind of process there. I think my big kind of bugbear that I keep saying with lots of leaders, and they're probably fed up of me saying it, and I'll ruin your podcast by saying it again on yours now, is that people often go, right, I'm going to hire a second minister or a second pastor or a second leader. And that might be what the church needs. But often the person they hire, the leader then passes all their administration stuff to that person.
Yeah.
And the assistant pastor's going, I just want to do what you're doing. That's what I've been trained to do, but I'm now doing all the admin. And you see that so much. And actually, just a 5-hour, 10-hour post in a scenario like that with a leader, before you go to a second pastor, stop and have a breather and go, actually, if we put 10 hours into this, 8 hours admin, 2 hours comms, what difference could that make? And I'd take the risk on that before I'd go and employ a second pastor. And so I'm a big advocate for admin and ops teams being like a second hire, and that being a principle that people think about. That would be my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Actually, that takes it on to the next question. Do you see a lot of crossover in administrator roles and sort of the area of church comms?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lots of church managers I know who would love to pay someone to do comms, haven't got the budget to do it, and are cutting back, and so they take responsibility for it. And so I do see a lot of that. Where there's those kind of joint roles that we're taking on somebody, or I'm managing a volunteer who's got that role, and so I have to bring the strategy or the thinking. They may be doing the kind of implementation, but again, a lot of it is done centrally through a church office. As you get bigger, maybe sort of 200 plus, you've got a building, you've got staff. You begin to start to need someone, and until you have someone, you as a church manager feel the responsibility to do it and to cover it. And it's one of these things, as a church administrator, you've got to know about finance, you've got to know about buildings, you've got to know about people, you've got to know about comms, you've got to know how to plan and prayerfully plan and work with leaders, which sometimes can be challenging because they've got 1,000 ideas, and you're like, okay, how are we going to actually take one of these forward? So it's lots of plates. It's that ability to have to know lots about lots of little things, and I think that's where the crossover comes. So lots of church managers have got a wealth of knowledge of all sorts of things across the church, and I think sadly for me, before we had someone, I was doing comms, and I was just terrible, just needing to not even knowing about scheduling tools, which would have helped me so much. So going through your content and going your podcast and learning things like what are basic things that we can do. The whole approach that you guys have of common sense is so helpful. It's so helpful, and there is huge crossover, and there's finding help like you guys is great.
But I know, and I kind of want to emphasize this of not beating yourself up, because I know firsthand, as someone who cares about comms and has experience in it, it's really hard to prioritize that, even within a paid church role. You know, there's so much else going on. Gavin, this is great. Like, I'm sure we could talk all day about this. We don't have time for that, but thankfully there's another podcast which does talk about all of these things called The Church Office. So before we sort of ask people where they can find you and round off, do you have any feels for any sort of wins, quick wins, or any exciting opportunities that you're aware of at the moment to help churches?
Yeah, I think there's lots of really good training that's out there. And I think, since COVID, people have, like, their budgets are shrinking, and they're not putting a priority on training for people and their staff and volunteers. And I think that, for me, is we're missing something there. And so I want to be, growing and learning and getting better. And so, as if I do that, then that's going to flow out into my team, and my team are going to be better. And so I think training, thinking about how we can send people into different areas to grow and gain experience is a quick win that will benefit the church and will hugely benefit, the operations that you're running. So put some time into that, and just think about that. People focused. What can I do that'll make me better and make others better for the glory of God? And that's
amazing.
Love that. Super. So where can people find you and the Church Office podcast? Give us all of the links and details.
Yeah, it's the churchoffice.co.uk. Have a look on there. We've got 90-odd different episodes of different, huge range of topics that might be, interesting to you. And maybe you're thinking, right, I've got to put a new building policy in or maintenance schedule. Then you're going to find somebody talking about it on the podcast, or a Mercy Ministries project, or whatever. We've got a range of things. We're on all the different podcast platforms. So type in the Church Office, come up, check out a couple of episodes, see how terrible we are, see how maybe interesting we might be. But it's a very down-to-earth, very relaxed, kind of conversational one, saying people who are doing the jobs, talking about it. And we want to encourage and inspire people to do these roles behind the scenes, all these behind-the-scenes roles. Let's celebrate them, let's enjoy them, and let's grow together.
Yeah, absolutely. Gavin, thanks so much. You can now go and enjoy your shortbread. For the listener, why not go and listen to the reverse episode of this collab crossover that we've done on the Church Office, and we will be back soon.
Yeah.
Gourds and Pomegranates is brought to you by Joe Gallant and Hannah Fleming Hill. You can find episode transcripts and contact the show via gppodcast.uk.